healing the wound of the masculine and how that wound can show up and what it can do in relationship. Does that make sense the way I'm wording it?
Absolutely.
And how you can start to heal the wound with the masculine.
This is such a big question as well, and something I've been really sitting in for the last couple of years, because it was really interesting. I feel like for a lot of my life, I did a lot of healing with the feminine, especially because I was only raised by my mother. So my mother was my big imprint. And so I definitely moved through healing with the mother and like connecting with earth and like sort of this goddess or mother energy. And it was really interesting because when I started obviously connecting with a more sort of masculine essence of God, that really shifted everything in my entire sphere and trickled down into my relationship, like so many things, money, even my intimacy, sex, like it really started coming through on so many layers. And it was stuff that I didn't, it was so, must have been oblivious to it. And I knew that the way we felt about the masculine really does affect like the type of men we call in, the type of partners we call in. But it goes so much further than that. Like it even affects like my business, how I show up in my business, how I relate to my business, the structuring process in my business. And it's been it's been deep, I think, as women. So as like, if we want to say like the feminine, it's not so much, and this is the things that we usually get taught in sort of the spirituality lens. And I love looking at everything from certain lenses. So a lot of the spirituality lens is like balancing sort of the masculine and feminine internally. And what I find really interesting is that doesn't actually show up like how we relate to the masculine externally, right? And so I think that there was this whole paradigm shift when I was like, I am feminine, like my pole internally and how I chose to come into this life was a feminine being. And like, how do I relate to the masculine in relationship? In my marriage, you know, the masculine as God sort of presence, you know, that penetrative force of energy. And it's been a lot of somatic work, a lot of deep-seated body work, because as we know, we don't just conceptualize and hold things in our brains, we hold them much deeper. And I had to go back in my lineage, and I had to really sit with how my mother taught me to think and feel about the masculine and move through. And it was icky, and I'm still very much moving through this process. I'm not going to be, you know, and it's because it's so hard as women and as the feminine, I believe. And this is mostly the type of people I work with, which I find funny, because I do work with a lot of women and a lot of beautiful people who have experienced like sexual trauma, sexual abuse. And it's so weird to sit in this space where you have to open up to basically the abuser, like the one who basically was the perpetrator of this assault or these traumas. And it's such a weird dynamic, but it's something, and I love what you shared about tending to the wound over and over, because these things are so big. It's like about integrating it and allowing yourself to soothe it and nourish it while still remaining open to the masculine. But I mean, it's so big because it's bleeded everywhere into our society, with the wave of feminism and the way we view masculinity and our men. And it's been such an interesting process, because I believe that as women, as the feminine, we have the ability to move so much energetically within society, within our relationships, with everything. So I feel like there is an element of working with this so that we show up differently in our relationships. We call in different men. We energetically set the tone for men to rise in their own, masculine essence. And I do believe that we can change the world by doing this. Call me optimistic, but I really feel there's this element of moving with our own shit, like really showing up radically responsible for what we're holding in our body and our system, and processing it to change that paradigm completely.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Can you speak to, just use the words, I'm a feminine being and I'm in my feminine pole. And oftentimes in the personal development world, I've used it as well in the past couple years ago. It's like balancing your inner masculine and your inner feminine. And when I think about that, I'm not in my masculine a whole lot. And I'm like, do I want them balanced? I've been in certain times in my life very much in my masculine, but the older I get, the less like no more go, or, very goal oriented, linear, that kind of thing. And so that part of me is not really there, but you see that balancing your inner masculine and inner feminine. And I think it's so beautiful. It's like, I'm a woman. My pole is the feminine. I can access my masculine, but I don't need to be in it 50% of the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what we see. We see that a lot in the spiritual community. Yeah, that balancing 50-50. And I used to definitely feel and believe and move with that as truth. But something has definitely shifted within me the last few years to believe that, yeah, I'm actually feminine. Exactly like you said, I'm feminine. I feel feminine. I am predominantly feminine. And there's this whole element of actually being held by the masculine. And so being held by the masculine to me is in all things. Like it shows up as how we relate to the masculine. So being held in my relationship and my marriage, being supported by my business, being, cared for by God and being cherished by God, and opening up to that presence. And it's like a relational thing. And I think that that's where that delicious like polarity sort of comes up, and like, you get that spark of birthing things into creation. And I find that, yeah, we definitely can call on this masculine, and really we're talking about energy. Like, a lot of people really move into this space of, especially in the polarity world and the traditional world, they move into like gender roles and gender, like men and women. And to me, when I really sit into the truth of this world and my body and everything around it, it really is an energetic expression. So like you said, you can definitely cultivate this energetic expression internally of the masculine. You can definitely like balance them out. You can't see my little air quotes here, but air quotes, balance them out. But I definitely feel there's more life there's more life force and there's more energy with sitting in the truth of like your energetic expression. And if that's feminine, beautiful. And then allowing yourself to be penetrated by the masculine around you. There's so much like eros in that. There's so much more being moved by the energetics and like allowing yourself to soften and open up. It just feels different. Like it texturally feels different to my body to
Yeah.
relate to it that way. It feels like a softening, yeah, like a breath, like a yeah.
Yeah. It feels like that magnetic, radiant energy that is so, prevalent in the feminine, and allowing that to guide the way. Yeah. Can you speak to feminism? Did I say
Yeah.
that right? Feminism? Yeah.
Feminism.
And I've had many men on the podcast that have spoken to it and where it kind of led us astray. But I would love to hear your take on it and what it has done
Yeah.
to
Beautiful.
for women.
Yeah. I feel like this is so here in the collective at the moment, right? I feel like we're unraveling so much. And it's really powerful to actually be, it's so good to be here in this time and space, isn't it? Sometimes I'm in awe. Holy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I see, when I look at things from a very sort of meta perspective. So I very much like zoom out and see things. It's one of that's just how I view things. But I definitely feel with everything, there is truth and there is falsity. There is like an illusion weaved, intertwined with it. And when we look at it like this, I think we're up to like the third wave of feminism at the moment, the third or fourth wave. I can't remember.
I think so. I think it's I don't know, third or fourth, but I've seen some videos of the third wave of feminism, and I don't even know what that looks like, what the third wave looks like.
Okay, beautiful. That's where I'm taking it. Perfect. So I feel like with the first wave of things, with the first essence of things, they come from a very like mostly pure space, unless it's like a psyop and it's an inversion in its totality. Most times there is a real thread of truth that is being projected into the collective for healing. And we see that with the first wave feminism, there was a rise of obviously women not wanting to be oppressed, women wanting to have like these rights, which they should have. And there was this real essence of truth in that. Like there was a real good wave of it coming through and then it kind of takes on its own pulse. Sometimes it takes on its own pulse as we get further and get pulled further away. It takes on a little bit more of the inverted essence sometimes, or the illusion. And then it can take us down a path of what I like to think of as, the pendulum swing, or like extremism. And I definitely feel that we have moved through that territory a lot. There's a lot of the scales are unbalanced. There's a lot of hatred towards masculinity, masculine patriarchy, all of these things, which is totally flipping out our collective. But on one level, I think sometimes that pendulum swing to the extreme has to be moved through before we move back into like that equilibrium, that sort of 0 point between the two extremes. So if we look at it like that, there's this real divine purpose for it. There's this real reclamation and liberation and all of that. But also it has definitely left its heavy marks on the extremism. And we're seeing a lot of feminine beings, a lot of women move through that hatred, that fear, that closure, that contraction, and just severing lots of things that are actually of goodness, of truth. So it's really interesting. And then we start to see the split and divide, right? Where we're seeing the people coming back and reclaiming that sort of homesteading traditional lives and being housewives. And that is an extreme in and of itself. And then we see this whole other extreme opposite end of the pendulum where they're a boss babe and can do everything themselves and kind of reject anything that is masculine whilst still being totally in their sort of wounded feminine, I like to say, or their shielded, armored feminine. you're portraying as the masculine. And it's really interesting because I feel there was a place, there was a thread of truth, and there was an essence of reclamation and liberation. But in all things, there's always that falsity, that illusion that's kind of been woven in there for a purpose that is not ours, a purpose that actually strays us from the path of what is true.
Yeah. I love that. I today was looking at land where the neighbors had goats and they were on the land I was looking at and everything. So that homesteading, it's like exactly what so many people are returning to, that really ancestral way of living, which is, yeah, I think it's necessary. It's almost like coming back to the village and community and supporting one another as opposed to the extreme isolation we all experienced with,
Absolutely.
you know, the pandemic and everything.